Here's what nobody saw coming. Just months ago, the White House was going hard against India. Trade wars were starting. Heavy taxes were being slapped on Indian goods. The talk from Washington was tough, almost hostile. America first meant India comes last. And that message was crystal clear. But then something flipped. Almost overnight, the tone changed completely. Now we're hearing about partnerships, cooperation, even friendship. The same administration that wanted to squeeze India economically is suddenly talking about working together. That's not just politics shifting, that's a total turnaround. So what caused this? What made Washington do such a quick U-turn? Because let's be honest, India didn't cave. New Delhi didn't bend the knee. If anything, India got more confident about doing things its own way, which means this change came entirely from America's side. And when the world's biggest power switches direction that fast, it's never because they suddenly got generous, it's because they had to. Look at what actually happened. For most of a year, America treated India like a problem that needed solving rather than a partner worth having. Trade disputes ruled everything. Energy policies became weapons. And during all this, India was quietly building bridges with other major players. Russia kept the relationship warm. China stayed engaged. Even European countries were giving New Delhi more attention than Washington was. That's the key story here. While America was busy making threats, India was making connections. And these connections are reshaping the whole game. Because here's what Washington finally realized. India isn't some small country you can bully into submission. India is the world's most populated nation. India is one of the fastest growing economies. India controls key shipping routes. And if you push India too hard, India doesn't collapse. India finds other options. That's exactly what started happening. Russian oil deals got bigger, Chinese business relationships stayed active, new partnerships emerged across Asia and beyond. India wasn't just surviving America's pressure, India was thriving despite it. And that sent a clear signal to Washington, this strategy isn't working. Now, before we dig into why the tone shifted, we need to understand just how bad things got between these two countries, because honestly, it looked like a disaster waiting to happen. When Trump came back to power this year, India knew trouble was coming. They understood what America first really meant, and sure enough, the hit started immediately. New tariffs appeared almost daily. 25% extra cost on Indian steel, massive duties on textiles, heavy penalties on chemical exports. For Indian businesses, this was devastating. Companies that had been selling to America for decades suddenly couldn't compete. The message from Trump was blunt and simple. India sells too much to us. We don't sell enough to them. Their barriers are too high. They've been taking advantage. From Washington's view, this was about protecting American workers and American companies. But from India's perspective, it looked like something else entirely. Bullying, economic warfare, a demand to play by America's rules or face the consequences. Then came the energy attacks, another 25% tax, this time targeting India's purchases of Russian oil. Now, this wasn't just about trade anymore. This was about survival. India imports over 80% of its oil needs. Since the war in Ukraine started, Russian crude became a lifeline, keeping fuel affordable for over 1 billion people. Cutting that supply would hit India's economy at its foundation. Transportation costs would explode. Manufacturing would suffer. Food prices would skyrocket. America's logic was straightforward. Stop funding Moscow by buying cheap oil. But for India, this argument missed reality completely. Because here's the truth. India wasn't buying Russian oil before the war. Less than 1% came from Moscow. But after Western sanctions isolated Russia, cheap crude became available. Why wouldn't India take it? Why should ordinary Indians pay higher gas prices to satisfy Washington's global strategy? So when these oil duties were announced, the relationship looked ready to break. And the timing made everything worse. America had no ambassador in India, no one on the ground to explain, negotiate, or manage the damage. For half a year, one of the world's most important relationships was basically running on autopilot. That gap didn't go unnoticed. Beijing noticed, Moscow noticed, European capitals noticed in international politics, being absent means being weak, and America was completely absent right when India was deepening ties with other global powers. Many people in New Delhi started thinking Washington was taking India for granted, assuming it had no choice but to comply. But that assumption was dead wrong. India wasn't complying. It was asserting independence, buying Russian oil, expanding Chinese trade, hosting major international summits, building its own path forward. That's the real issue here. Washington thought economic pressure could force India into line. Instead, it pushed India towards self-reliance and closer relationships with other major players. And that brings us to the pivot, the softer language, the sudden change in approach. Because if America kept pushing too hard, it risked losing India completely. And in today's world, losing India simply isn't an option for any superpower. So here's where the story gets really interesting. After months of pressure, after tariffs and duties and threats, after leaving India without an American ambassador for half a year, Washington's tone suddenly shifted, not gradually, almost overnight. Think about the sequence. First, Trump meets with Putin in Alaska, bold move, controversial decision. It shocked European allies and surprised America's own establishment. But here's the crucial part. After that meeting, U.S. language toward India began changing, as if the White House realized it couldn't afford to fight battles on too many fronts at once. Then came the new messaging. No more harsh talk about India's unfair trade practices. Instead, statements about ongoing dialogue, advancing partnerships, and respecting the relationship. That's diplomatic language for we can't push you too hard anymore. We need you on our side. Right after that, the big announcement. America would finally send an ambassador to India. For 6 months, that position stayed empty. Now suddenly, Trump picks Marco Silva, one of his most trusted advisors. Not a career diplomat, not a bureaucratic appointment, a personal loyalist who reports directly to the president. That's not accidental. That's a message. And the message is crystal clear. India matters now. But why this sudden change? Several factors came together at once. First, China's moves. Just before the ambassador announcement, Beijing's foreign minister visited New Delhi. That wasn't just a routine diplomatic meeting. That was China making sure India knows it has alternatives. And let's be real, if India and China find common ground, even temporarily, it completely changes Asia's balance of power. Washington can't let that happen. Second, the BRICS summit. In just weeks, leaders from Russia, China, Brazil, and South Africa will sit with India at the same table. America doesn't get invited. That means one of the world's most influential economic platforms could shift further away from Western influence unless Washington keeps India at least partially aligned with American interests. Third, global perception. For too long, America looked absent from India. Absent while Russia was strengthening energy ties. Absent while China was holding high-level talks. Absent while India was hosting major world events. If that perception became permanent, Washington risked looking irrelevant in one of the world's most important regions. No superpower can afford that. So the tone changed, not because Trump suddenly developed warm feelings for India, not because Washington had a change of heart about trade or energy, but because strategy demanded it, because reality forced it. India didn't back down. India didn't surrender, and that's exactly why America is now recalibrating its entire approach. This softer tone isn't the final move, it's the opening of a new phase, a phase where Washington tries to rebuild trust, reestablish presence, and pull India closer without applying too much pressure. The big question now is how India will respond, and what leverage does New Delhi actually have in this moment? That's what we need to explore next. Here's the thing about real power in international politics. It's not just about military strength or economic size, it's about leverage. And right now, India has more leverage than almost any country on the planet. Think about it. Washington is changing its approach, not because it wants to, but because it has to. China is rising and won't be stopped easily. Russia refuses to be isolated despite massive pressure. Europe is divided and uncertain. And right in the middle of all this chaos sits India, the world's fastest growing major economy. the most populated nation, a democracy with global respect, a country that can maintain relationships with everyone without being controlled by anyone. That's real leverage. And if New Delhi plays this situation correctly, this moment could be transformational for India's global position. Let's break down India's advantages. First, energy independence. India's reliance on Russian oil has been criticized by the West, but actually it's a bargaining chip. India can continue importing from Moscow to keep energy affordable while simultaneously inviting American energy companies to expand their presence in Indian markets. It doesn't have to be either or, it can be both. By doing this, India sends a clear signal to Washington. If you want a piece of this massive energy market, don't punish us with tariffs. Work with us as partners. Second, geographic importance. Look at any world map. America's Indo Pacific strategy, the big plan to balance China's influence, simply doesn't work without India. Military bases in Japan and Australia are helpful, but they're far from the action. India sits right at the heart of the Indian Ocean, controlling the lifeline of global trade. If Washington wants to counter Beijing's growing influence, it needs India. And New Delhi knows this completely. Third, market opportunities. The numbers here are staggering. American companies are desperately searching for growth beyond saturated Western markets. Where do they look? India's middle class is projected to reach 500 million people within just a few years. Technology, retail, defense, healthcare, finance, everything. If Washington wants its companies to succeed globally, it can't afford to be locked out of India's market. Fourth, diplomatic flexibility. India is the only major power that can participate in the Quad alliance with America, Japan, and Australia while simultaneously attending BRICS meetings with China and Russia. No other country has this range of relationships. This makes India a bridge between competing power blocs. In a world of fractured alliances and growing tensions, that diplomatic flexibility is invaluable. So what does this mean practically? It means India shouldn't treat Trump's softer approach as a generous gift. It's not charity, it's recognition. Recognition that India has become indispensable to America's global strategy. This is the perfect moment for India to secure real concessions, lower tariffs on Indian exports, technology transfer agreements, long-term investment commitments, a more balanced partnership where India's sovereignty and national interests are fully respected. Because here's the reality that Washington is finally accepting. America needs India just as much, if not more, than India needs America. For the first time in decades, that mutual dependence is becoming obvious to everyone involved. Now, the crucial question becomes, what should India actually do with this leverage? Because leverage only has value if you use it wisely. Right now, India has a rare opportunity, a moment when Washington is showing flexibility, when China and Russia are watching closely, and when the global balance of power is shifting in India's direction. Here's what India should consider doing. Number one, turn trade disputes into trade opportunities. Those tariffs were meant as punishment, but India can transform them into bargaining chips. How? By proposing a comprehensive trade package. India can offer to reduce certain barriers, but only if America does the same. That means securing better access for Indian goods, especially in sectors like pharmaceuticals, information technology, and agriculture. The personal relationship between Trump and Modi could be crucial here. Both leaders respect strength and understand tough negotiations. This is the perfect time to strike a deal where both sides can claim victory. Number two, protect energy security at all costs. This cannot be negotiated away. India cannot afford to abandon Russian oil overnight, not when over 1 billion people depend on affordable fuel for their daily lives. The solution is smart diversification. Continue buying from Moscow to maintain price stability, but simultaneously expand imports from America and Middle Eastern countries. Present this as responsible energy policy. India isn't choosing Russia over America. India is protecting its people's welfare. That framing matters because it turns apparent defiance into responsible governance. Number three, maximize diplomatic balance. India doesn't need to choose between East and West. It should actively engage both sides. deepen defense cooperation through the Quad while staying engaged in BRICS and other multilateral platforms. This approach forces Washington to treat India as an equal partner, not a junior ally following orders. If America knows India has other options, it will show more respect for Indian positions. Number 4, use the new ambassador strategically. Marco Silva isn't just another diplomat. He's Trump's personal choice and trusted advisor. That means every conversation and every message goes directly to the president. India should use this channel aggressively. Push for fast-track investment approvals, demand concrete progress on defense technology sharing, tie future cooperation to measurable outcomes, not vague promises. If Washington wants stronger influence in India, it needs to deliver tangible benefits. Number 5, secure long-term commitments. American politics operates in election cycles, but India must think in terms of decades. That means pushing for agreements that survive political changes. Energy partnerships, manufacturing investments, technology sharing, all structured as long-term frameworks that protect Indian interests regardless of who controls the White House. At its core, this is about flipping the traditional power dynamic. For years, Washington assumed it could pressure India into compliance through economic and diplomatic tools. Now, the pressure flows in the opposite direction. America needs India to balance China, stabilize global supply chains, and maintain relevance in Asia's growing importance. That's leverage, and India should use it not cautiously, but boldly. Opportunities like this don't come often in international relations. When you step back and look at the bigger picture, you realize something important. This isn't just about tariffs or oil purchases or diplomatic appointments. What's happening right now reflects a much larger transformation in how global power actually works. For decades, the story was simple and predictable. America set the rules, and other countries adjusted their behavior accordingly. Sometimes they resisted initially, but eventually they fell in line with American preferences. That was the established playbook, and it worked because no other nation had the economic size, military power, or global influence to seriously challenge American dominance. But that world has disappeared. China is rewriting international rules through massive infrastructure projects and economic partnerships. Russia refuses to accept isolation despite unprecedented sanctions. Europe struggles with internal divisions and unclear strategic direction. And India is rising confidently, not quietly or apologetically, but with clear determination to chart its own course. For the first time in the modern era, Washington finds itself adapting to New Delhi's choices rather than the other way around. That's the fundamental shift happening here. Trump's change in tone isn't about developing sudden affection for India. It's about acknowledging a new reality. India has become central to virtually every major global challenge. You can't effectively isolate Russia without India's cooperation. You can't successfully counter China's rise without India's participation. You can't stabilize international supply chains without India's involvement. And if you want access to the next great consumer market, you definitely can't ignore India's growing economic power. This makes the current moment historically significant. It's not just about America softening its approach, it's about India stepping confidently into a role it has been preparing for, the role of a balancing power that doesn't get pulled into other nations' orbits, but instead creates its own gravitational field. That's why India can participate in military exercises with America while simultaneously attending economic summits with China. That's why it can buy Russian energy while maintaining defense partnerships with Western countries. That's why it can host international meetings where competing powers sit at the same table. This isn't confusion or inconsistency, it's strategic positioning. And here's what makes this approach so powerful. It forces every major player to take India seriously. It transforms India from a passive partner following someone else's lead into an indispensable power that shapes global